here, and it's safe to say that there's a lot of water under the bridge. But right now, it's also safe to say there's a lot of water over the bridge, around the bridge, and washing some of those bridges away. And of course, I mean that literally. Helene reached all the way up here and far beyond. And I was lucky. There was no damage to my home in Asheville. We still can't drink the tap water. The city says maybe by December 18th. That's our hope. There is plenty of non-potable water that has washed away much that seemed so solid and secure. And I don't just mean that literally. I mean it in that place where metaphor stirs the primal silt. So it's been less than 2 weeks since the election. Does it seem longer? Maybe to some of you, it does to me. So as I've sat with that news, it's been a kind of revelation, things I had not seen and perhaps had not wanted to see, things that have been revealed about this country I love. Now, if some of you here today are silently celebrating the outcome of the election, you're welcome here. And know that some of us are feeling the loss very personally and very viscerally, and some of us fear for ourselves and our loved ones. If that's you, know that you are welcome too. So after Helene, my neighbors and I were cut off from the world in 2 different ways. There's one road that leads out of our development, and on both ends of that road, big trees came down and took power lines with them. So we were really stuck in the neighborhood, and we had no cell service, no calls, no texts, no internet. So we were cut off from communication. We learned to call our fancy cell phones our $1,000 flashlights. That's all they were good for. But in the midst of that isolation, we came out of our homes and we talked to each other and we checked on each other. And pretty soon we dragged a couple of charcoal grills out front and fired them up and started to cook that stuff that was thawing in our freezers. And we gathered to eat together by lantern light. We gathered around each other's cars to listen to the radio. That was our only connection with what was going on past our neighborhood. We did not ask each other about political affiliation or income level or education level. We didn't care whether people drove Priuses or pickup trucks, and both are in my neighborhood. Now, I know there are many, many stories like this. I've heard stories from every neighborhood in Asheville, and I know there are stories from here as well. Bill Pelto tells me it was said that the yuppies, the hippies, and the hillbillies all came together and worked together, and it was really powerful. People came together. And then on Tuesday, November 5th, there was this other event. And my neighborhood went really silent. We knew that behind some of the doors there was wild jubilation, and behind others there was sadness and lament. So on November 6th, we did not come out of our homes and make stone soup in the parking lot. And in some ways, that isolation felt much more intense than it had right after the hurricane. I remember years ago, after 9/11, I went to the mall, and there was among the people there a shared sense of shock and outrage. And in the food court, we met each other's eyes. We had shared this profound loss, and we made whatever small human connection we could. And then some years later, after the 2016 election, I had some need. I went to the mall and I found that I couldn't meet people's eyes for fear that I might see smug self-satisfaction there. Some of us had experienced catastrophe, and others had perpetrated it. And looking around, I could not tell the difference. So I know that this chasm between neighbors is not really something new. And I know that I have helped perpetuate it. If I'm honest, there are so many times I have said, I just don't get how anyone could vote for that man. So many times I've thought, well, they must be deluded or duped, or maybe they're stupid, or maybe they're evil. But face it, Trump and the right-wing wave that propelled him to power have been around for at least a decade. So what is it about me when I still say, I just don't get it. I don't understand how people could vote for him. So what am I missing? After all these years, what am I not hearing? This past week, I had a conversation with my colleague, Bob Rengillian. He pastors the UU Church in Brevard, North Carolina. Bob has learned that he's got some hearing loss and he's about to get hearing aids, and he's very excited about that because he says that he's found out when our ears stop picking up certain frequencies, the parts of our brains that process those frequencies begin to atrophy. They literally shrink. So Reverend Bob and I began to wonder if there are voices in America that we have been like la 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 tuning out, not listening to voices of lament, of anger, voices of despair. And I realized that when I say, I just don't get how anybody could vote for, it might be a sign that I have just not been listening, and maybe that parts of my brain and my heart have begun to atrophy. Now, the last church I served before my retirement was in East Tennessee, that place of mountains and hollers, much like Western North Carolina. The UU Church in Oak Ridge, Tennessee is a thriving place, solidly mid-sized congregation, lots of energy, plenty of families with kids. And the vitality in that progressive church is thanks in part to having one of the national laboratories right there in the city. Some of you might know that the world's fastest supercomputer is just over the mountains in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. They also have a good-sized nuclear weapons facility and many other institutions where scientists are plentiful and advanced degrees are required. Now, the city of Oak Ridge, on the other hand, is decidedly an Appalachian city. And here's a little history. I'm just going to scratch the surface, and I know some of you know this so much more deeply than I. The farmers in the mountains of Appalachia came from Northern Ireland and Scotland, and they may well have carried with them across the waters some ancestral memory of being displaced from their homes. Many of them migrated once in North America to Appalachia. They could find land that was so poor and so remote that most people didn't want it, so it was cheap. So the descendants of the Ulster Irish and the Scots lived relatively undisturbed in the Appalachian Mountains. They lived there for generations. And then in the 1930s, in the midst of the Great Depression, the federal government says, hey, mountain folks, we see your poverty and your isolation. Back in Washington, D.C., we've cooked up an idea, part of the New Deal. We aim to bring you electric lights and washing machines, and we will control the flooding along the Tennessee River and make navigating that river so much easier. We call this new and exciting project the Tennessee Valley Authority. And oh, by the way, we need your land. Did we mention? We need your farm. Yeah, move. So the federal government began in the 30s to appropriate family farms and dam up the river. And that did reduce flooding in some areas, but in truth, the dams covered more land than they protected. And that improved navigation, that was a real thing. It turned out mostly to be a way to get coal from the mountains to the electrical plants. And then there was that wonderful promise that the federal project would bring the Appalachian people out of poverty. Well, the people of Appalachia lagged behind other Americans then, and they still do, in terms of quality of education, access to health care, and general poverty. And incidentally, the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, is still a private entity backed by the federal government, kind of like Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. So the TVA doesn't get direct federal subsidies anymore. It does not have to pay taxes to the federal government. And the TVA still does not have to follow all the federal regulations that govern things like workplace safety or regulations on hydroelectric plants. Yeah. So there's this idea dreamed up by the Washington elites and presented with great promise, and it did enrich a few people back in Washington, D.C. and some other places. Meanwhile, the farmers and the rural folk were displaced. Many of them went to work in those under-regulated electrical plants or in the coal mines. Okay, fast forward 10 years, 1942, middle of World War II, times were desperate to beat the forces of fascism. The federal government decided that East Tennessee was the perfect place to build a nuclear bomb. Well, actually to enrich the uranium, but you get the idea. The Manhattan Project claimed 60,000 acres in East Tennessee. Now, there were 80 family farms in that area. Think about the farms and the Sweetwater wells and the livestock. And many of those farms had family graveyards on the premises. So generations of ancestors were literally part of the soil. And in July of 1942, all those farm families got eviction notices. Some had as little as 2 weeks to vacate their land. And they watched as the government built a fence with gates and guard towers and armed soldiers with orders to shoot to kill. And yes, the feds offered fair market value for those farms. And imagine what would happen any place if 60,000 acres were taken off the market. The property values around Oak Ridge skyrocketed. What had been fair market value would no longer buy a farm or much of anything. So there were more Appalachian folks who went into coal mining and other low-wage jobs, often in unregulated or underregulated industries. Now, I grew up in a Navy family, didn't think much about Appalachia. I thought Appalachia was pretty much West Virginia, frankly, maybe a little bit of surrounding area. Now I know, as you probably already know, that the biggest city in Appalachia is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Most of Pennsylvania is part of Appalachia. It goes all the way from the southern parts of New York State, includes a swath of Ohio, most of Pennsylvania, a big chunk of Kentucky, yes, all of West Virginia, travels through Tennessee, North Carolina, extends all the way down into northern Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. It's a massive region, and it's had access to so many government programs. And yet, in terms of federal spending, it still lags far behind the rest of the country. It underperforms in education and economic development. And it outstrips every other part of the country in most measures of poverty, including deaths of despair, suicide, drug overdose, and cirrhosis of the liver. Deaths of despair in Appalachia are 72% higher than the national average. Last year, when I was serving in Oak Ridge, I did a funeral for a 19-year-old kid who died of fentanyl poisoning. He was one of those UU kids who regularly went to the mountain for youth cons and came back singing all the songs. His mom was on the ministerial search team. So I don't think that this is a phenomenon just limited to other people. So you can Google a map of Appalachia and then bring to mind a map of the voting patterns in our recent presidential election. And there are a few bright blue islands, but for the most part, Appalachia is bright blood red. Our neighbors voted overwhelmingly in a way I struggle to comprehend. And as Bob Rangillian suggested, maybe I just haven't been listening. Maybe parts of my comprehension apparatus have atrophied. Consider some of the pressing issues all of humanity faces. For one, climate change. Oh, we are rightly concerned. David Brooks says liberal white college graduates favor eliminating fossil fuels by 2-to-1. It's no skin off their teeth. They work on laptops. But if you live in a region or work in an industry that runs on oil, coal, or natural gas, this idea seems like an assault on your way of life, which, of course, it is. An overwhelming 72% of Americans favor an approach to mitigating climate change that includes both renewables and traditional energy sources. And immigration, that's a real problem, partly fueled by climate change. Brooks says highly educated white progressives tend to see the immigration issue through the lens of oppressor and oppressed. The people coming across our border are fleeing horror in their home countries. But most Americans see immigration through a law and order lens. We need to preserve social order and jobs. We need to take care of our own. In a June CBS survey, 62% of Americans said they support a program to deport undocumented immigrants. And this is astonishing to me. 53% of Hispanics support the deportation of undocumented immigrants. Now, hey, most of you, are undocumented workers coming for your jobs? Is that likely? Because they weren't coming for mine. And I suspect if it were otherwise, my perspective would shift. So there is some despair in our land. We feel it, and we're surrounded by it. One of my favorite poets is Mary Oliver, and in one of her most famous poems, she says, "Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine." I read that recently and realized I have been so in touch with my despair about the state of the world, and most acutely in the last 2 weeks. And I wonder what might happen if I took Mary Oliver's famous line to heart. Tell me about despair, yours, and I consider the despair that is endemic in our region. Pardon me. Brene Brown says despair is a claustrophobic feeling. It's the emotion that says nothing will ever change. Despair is different than anger or sadness or grief. Despair is tinged with hopelessness. She says people who subscribed to power over leadership often weaponize despair. They count on people giving up on themselves, their work, and each other. I get it. I'm looking at people I know with suspicion. I'm questioning the value of my work. I'm wondering if courage, kindness, and caring for each other simply don't matter anymore. I don't know if that resonates for you. It really resonates deeply with me. And Brene Brown says the antidote to despair is hope. She says hope is not an emotion, it's not a feeling. Hope, she says, is a cognitive behavioral process. It's about having a goal, a pathway to achieve that goal, and a sense of agency. I never really thought about hope requiring a sense of agency, but it makes sense to me on some deep level. I think somebody else already mentioned this today. I have restricted my own news intake lately because I feel like my despair is so close to the surface, and I fight this sense that there's nothing I can do about it. I feel I have no agency. So in order to move past the despair towards its antidote, hope, we have to claim our sense of agency. I can do something. And we have to grant agency to folks who are not just like us. Brene Brown asks, how can I make sure that in the maelstrom of my emotions, I stay committed to courage and kindness and caring for others, regardless of the choices made by others? Doing the smallest next right thing is hard, but sometimes it's all we've got. Now, presentations about what we can do are for another day. Today, let's concentrate on refusing to let the best parts of our natures atrophy. I hope you will join me in singing a loving kindness blessing. I invite you to call into your mind and your heart people with whom you do not agree as we stay seated and sing together number 1031 in our teal hymnal. 1031 in the teal hymnal. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole.
Our services for the next 2 weeks will focus on gratitude. Next Sunday, in a service called Pathways for Gratitude, we will hear from members of our community, Peyton Strauss, John Abbott, and Shane Hillman, and their perspectives and experiences with gratitude. The following Sunday, December 1st, will include a shared Thanksgiving meal as well as a short service.
These closing words are a poem by Rosemary Watola Trommer. It's called Hope. Hope has holes in its pockets. It leaves little crumb trails so that we, when anxious, can follow it. Hope's secret, it doesn't know the destination. It knows only that all roads begin with one foot in front of the other. Let us take hope from this place into our lives. I'll extinguish the flame of the chalice, but not the bright light of hope that I hope we carry forth.
Please stand and join me in our closing hymn, number 1014, Standing on the Side of Love. It's in the teal hymnal. The promise of the Spirit, faith, hope, and love abide, and so every soul is blessed and made whole. The truth in our hearts is our guide. We are standing on the side of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are standing on the side of love. Sometimes we build a barrier to keep love tightly bound, corrupted by fear, unwilling to hear, denying the beauty we found. We are standing on the side of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are standing on the side of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are standing on the side of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim. We are standing on the side of love. We are standing on the side of love. If you would like to participate in a discussion based on today's service, we invite you to take a moment now, refill your coffee if you'd like, get a quick snack, and be back here in the sanctuary in 5 minutes. And otherwise, thank you all for being here this morning. We hope to see you back next week. Go in peace.